Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and family, and everybody else, it's such a great pleasure to be with you today on the third episode of Season 4 of Real Talk with Billy and Cory, live from the Monster Center sound booth in Blacksburg, Virginia. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Hot Take Billy Parvatam on hand, joined by my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael. Some people call him Cory Van Dyke. Cory, it's great to be back with you for number 3 this season.
Yeah, episode 3, week 3 here, back in Blacksburg. Looking forward to a great show that we'll have today, mainly going over the Super Bowl. Congrats to the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, Andy Reid, his first Super Bowl as well, so we'll get more into that.
And before we get to all of that, we have a special guest with us. He's very well known in the Virginia Tech SMA Sports Media Analytics program. In fact, he won't admit it, but he's done a lot to help bring the program to where it is from a student's perspective. He's also the first two-time guest to come back on our show. He was back on our show last year in the spring, but it's my pleasure to welcome, I call him Mr. Big Shot, Evan Hughes, back to the Real Talk hot seat.
Thank you guys so much for having me. You know, I like how you introduced yourself as Billy Hot Take Parvatam. I like that. It's got a ring to it.
And, Evan,
and
of course.
True to it.
It is true. As Evan knows, we go way back. Evan is a junior here at Virginia Tech. He's involved in a number of things, a big sports fan. So, Evan, I'll kind of let you take the floor from here. Tell our viewers, if they didn't hear you last time, a little bit about yourself and what you're working on now here at Tech.
Sure. Well, again, thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm lucky to call both of you good friends, and especially Billy, going back for, God, I know it's only been 2 years, but I feel like I've known you like my whole life. I am a junior from Richmond, Virginia. I'm in the Sports Media and Analytics program here at Virginia Tech. I have aspirations of being a play-by-play broadcaster, and I'm lucky enough to get to do some work at the ACC Network Extra here at Virginia Tech. I'm a proud TechSideline.com podcast host. Get to host 2 shows a week with Will Stewart and Chris Coleman, talking Virginia Tech athletics. And just love being a Hokie. Love this program that Billy helped lay bricks in as well, the foundation, as well as Cory over here. I think the best writer to ever come through this program right here, Cory Van Dyke. So this is a great podcast you guys have going on. I'm thrilled that you guys would let me come on. And
another thing that Evan conveniently forgot to mention is the fact that he is the voice of the St. Cloud Rocks of the Northwoods League, a team that John Laser, the voice of the Hokies, once worked for. That city in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and he was the 2018 Northwoods League announcer of the year. In fact, that summer, both me and Evan were in the same division, and he stole that award from me. But, of course, very well-deserved.
Billy, I've said it. I had votes for you, man. I had our entire St. Cloud press box vote for you. I swear to God, that was the truth. And so you had a great summer that year in that league, and I think the Loggers finished better than the Rocks that year.
Yeah, that is true. The Loggers did have a better record. But really quickly, before we kind of get to the content of our podcast, Jake Lyman was here last week, a guy you know very well. And from my understanding, for TSL Tech Sideline, the 3 students that work for Tech Sideline are, in fact, you, Jake, and Cory. But talking to Cory last week, because we a group of us met outside, we're talking for a while. That was the first time that all 3 of y'all were kind of in the same room together at the same time. So I guess my question is, do y'all have beef because y'all work for the same company? Yet that was the first time that you guys had met. I know Cory and Jake, it was kind of unclear whether or not they had beef because they were taking subtle jabs at each other throughout the entire podcast last time. But do you and Cory have beef? I guess here the floor is yours to either settle that or maybe clear the air between you two if you need to.
I'm calling this fake news right here. There is absolutely no beef between me, Cory, and Jake. I mean, God, that's probably the last thing I would do to describe my great relationship with Cory and Jake. So no, those reports are false, as a matter of fact. We are great. I'm a great friend. Cory and I are great friends with Jake. It was cool to be in the same room together. We should have taken a picture together.
Yeah.
Because, so much of what we do is now, you can work for something like Cory. I mean, I'm sure you're not in the office that much. You can do everything from your computer. So it's tough to get all 3 of us together in the same room.
Yeah, like Evan said, those reports were fabricated. And I will say, though, the only beef, quotations on beef, that I do have with Evan is that I didn't get to meet his parents earlier than I got to meet them over winter break. And I got to say, Evan has some of the nicest parents I met. Like I said, met them over break. His mom runs Comfort Zone Camp, a great organization for grieving children, and got to meet her and hang out with her and Evan's dad as well over the course of a weekend, pretty much 3 days. And some of the nicest people I've met, and the apple definitely didn't fall far from the tree there of Evan. So just want to give that shout out as well to Lynn and Kelly, I believe their name is correct.
Corey, thanks so much, man. They loved getting to know you that weekend, and they think very highly of you as well. So, that was really cool. Corey got to meet my mom and my dad. So,
and I will say, for the record, I did meet your dad briefly one time. I believe it was at a Hokie Village right before a football game.
Yeah.
And a very nice guy. Of course, he likes the Redskins, so even more reason to like him. And congrats to your sister, too. Evan's younger sister got accepted to Virginia Tech. And is she officially coming here?
Yeah, she got an early decision, so she's in.
Hey.
Okay.
Unlike her brother, who was probably like the last four in on the bubble. So, yeah, she got in with flying colors.
Well, that's not saying much. But really quickly, Evan, you are a part of 3304 Sports. You've helped pioneer that, in all seriousness, with Bill and Jake and a few other students. And now that it's basically sort of like a student-run radio network. You guys are trying to emulate WAER at Syracuse, and now it's gotten to the point where you can post links to games on YouTube and post stand-ups. And now Kenny Brooks, who's another one of the nicest people you'll meet in sports, he's been helping out with stand-up. So kind of take us through how that started and what can prospective students do to get involved if they want to.
Yeah, 3304 Sports is a part of Bill Roth's Topics in Sports Communications 3304 class. So we are an extension of Bill's class, and we provide students the opportunity to go out into the field and get real world experience, not just doing play-by-play, but writing and covering games and putting on our 3304 Sports website, hosting a weekly podcast, and interviewing and doing stand-ups. We give opportunities for students to do that. So we have a leadership team. We had over 30 kids at our first meeting of the semester, many of which are very engaged, and we call just about every sport but football. So we're really thrilled and thankful for the opportunities that the Virginia Tech athletics department has given us, and we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. February 10th, 2019 was our first broadcast, and I think we're close to over 50 broadcasts in our first year. So we just launched the website. Shout out to David Cunningham and Liam Smith for doing a terrific job putting our website together. And to join, you can email me at evhughes@vt.edu. And there's no requirements, whether you have all the experience in the world or you're just interested in it, you've never done it before, you can get on the air and you can start writing or podcasting right away with 3304 Sports.
And you did mention that the network is part of technically part of Bill's play-by-play
class.
Correct,
it is a part of his class.
So it's not technically like WAER is at Syracuse affiliated with the student radio station here at Virginia Tech. That radio station is called WVT. Is that a goal of yours in the foreseeable future to try to have the two worlds merge together?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now WUVIT has a great platform, and what we're doing at 3304, we can't broadcast games live right now at the moment. So, I don't want to speak for what the future may hold. I think maybe down the road that could be a possibility, but right now we have a great, I think our YouTube channel and doing what we're doing right now has been a great avenue, and WUVIT's doing great work over there. David Cunningham, their sports director, and doing their weekly roundtable. So that, that's yet to be determined, but I think right now, we're just excited to celebrate a year of 3304 Sports and kind of build upon that for years to come, and then we'll see where it takes us.
And really quickly, before we go to the planned segment of our podcast today, you mentioned you want to be a play-by-play broadcaster, and of course, you've already gained experience with that through your work here at Virginia Tech and in St. Cloud. Do you have a favorite play-by-play guy you see right now that you think, if you could pick one guy, you're like, that's the guy I either like and want to emulate, really connect with? I mean, who's that one guy if you had to pick just one?
I feel like I really connect with Ian Eagle the most. I really, really like Ian Eagle, and I personally really hope that ESPN decides to bring him in as their new Monday Night Football voice if they decide to move on from Joe Tessitore. I think Ian Eagle is just terrific. I think he and I are very similar in the fact that we are more kind of upbeat broadcasters, and we make everything feel like a big moment and a big deal. And I resonate a lot with how he attacks broadcasting. So that's like 1A and 1B's Jim Nantz. I think Jim Nantz is phenomenal. I think his ability to call so many different sports at a high level and be so conversational on the air. I mean, he's so good. I mean, Sean McDonough, Mike Tirico. I mean, the list goes on and on, but I'm a huge fan of Ian Eagle as well as Jim Nantz.
Corey, what do you think about the a potential Ian Eagle, Tony Romo duo in the Monday Night Football? Of course, Monday Night Football, if you look at just the ratings, hasn't really been very good in the last couple of years. I think part of that has to do with the fact they're not getting the best games every week like they did back in the past. Tony Romo, a lot of people consider him the best NFL color commentator, and now there's reports of ESPN might be willing to throw $10 million towards him, which is more than he ever made in his career. He's really sort of revitalized himself and his reputation in his broadcasting career. What are your thoughts on Tony Romo potentially going to ESPN and maybe a Ian Eagle, Tony Romo potential duo in Monday Night Football?
No, I think that would be even like a dream duo to have those two guys calling the game together. Like Evan mentioned, Ian Eagle is, sort of, he's kind of lower known, I feel like, but sort of even the class of NFL football calling play-by-play, I feel like, just from his experience. He's that classic voice on a Sunday 1 o'clock game or something like that. And you look at Tony Romo, obviously, he retires from the Cowboys quarterback and jumps into this role, and he's a superstar right away. And just the relatability that he's able to bring and the way that I think just all the knowledge that he brings as well from playing the game and knowing what calls are going to be made and just stuff like that. That's what you're looking for out of a color commentator, and that's where I think he excels, whereas a guy like Booger McFarland might have fallen a little bit short in those kinds of categories. So I think Monday Night Football, that could revitalize it if you had two guys like that going. And I'll add on to another name that Evan didn't say, that one of my favorite guys to listen to, just because of his upbeat and just the way that he carries himself, is Gus Johnson.
Yeah.
I missed, he hasn't called college basketball March Madness games in a while, but I remember growing up, he was the guy that always had those big calls in college basketball in March, and he still does, I think, the FS1 games every now and then. But he's a guy too that I think we always look back. I mean, my brothers did at least, and would always type in like best Gus Johnson calls just because of how upbeat and how into the game he got.
I agree with both y'all. Ian Eagle and Tony Romo would be great for Monday Night Football, but I think they would be crazy to take that job if they were offered. Number one, Ian Eagle gets to call March Madness. He gets to call an NFL playoff game with CBS. Tony Romo, let's not forget, he gets to call a Super Bowl. You go to Monday Night Football, there's a chance ESPN might not get the rights to the Super Bowl. And also Jim Nantz, I think people underestimate just how much he makes that work, setting the ball up for Tony Romo and even calming him down at times to be able to work through a game. I would say for me, if I had to pick a national broadcaster, because obviously being a Nationals fan, you like those guys. Evan knows in baseball, you really get attached to your local guys.
Sure.
But if I had to pick one national broadcaster, I'd say Joe Buck. I think he is hated on a little too much. Obviously, there has been some calls in his career, which I think you can legitimately, say maybe he should have been more excited. But I think, I've read his autobiography, and just watched him, constantly over his career. He's been a guy that I think has been consistent doing, of course, the World Series and the Super Bowl, which he just recently finished up this Super Bowl. So that's my guy, but I think a good conversation on that, and it'll be interesting to see sort of what happens, I think, anytime you think about a job like Monday Night Football opening up and potential participants. I think that broadcasters, I think that's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. But let's transition now to the Super Bowl that happened on Sunday. I'm sure you guys heard about that game. But the Kansas City Chiefs defeated the San Francisco 49ers 31-20. I will say, for the record, on our podcast last week, I was the only one that picked the Chiefs to win. Corey and Jake picked the 49ers, and then Evan, at least I saw on Twitter, did pick the Chiefs.
I did have the Chiefs.
We were right, and
I mean, it was right there for the 49ers, though.
That's true, and so to kind of get to that, first of all, I was with Corey at a Super Bowl party. It was a bunch of people there, mostly girls, which I wasn't complaining about. But Corey, what were your thoughts on the game overall? Of course, the Niners were up 20-10 in the fourth quarter. And then Pat Mahomes leads the comeback for the Chiefs. Andy Reid wins his first Super Bowl. A lot of different storylines. What were your thoughts on the game overall?
No, I think overall it was a good game. A little boring at the first half a little bit, kind of not a whole lot of scoring. But then second half and really the fourth quarter was was entertaining the whole way through. And that's all you can really ask for, I think, in a big game like that is for it to be entertaining, for it to keep your attention late in the game. And that's exactly what it did. I mean, the 49ers ended up losing by 11, but they were in control of that game for pretty much other than the final 6 minutes. I think the Chiefs scored 21 points in the final 6 minutes. So they controlled that game, really. The 49ers did from the start till those final 6 minutes, and really just all fell apart there. I mean, we've heard in the days after that Kyle Shanahan has received his fair share of criticism for the play calling, not going aggressive at the end of the first half and then going too aggressive, passing the ball instead of running the ball late in the game. So I think, you can take some of that with a grain of salt, but ultimately it comes down to Patrick Mahomes as the best quarterback in that game, and throughout this postseason he was. He really proved it at the end there after struggled, with 2 interceptions to start the game, but really paved the way for his team to get that comeback. Third straight 10-plus point comeback in the playoffs. Kind of incredible how it all turned out. But happy for him, happy for Andy Reid, obviously. Was it 22 years now? That's his first Super Bowl. So congrats to the Chiefs, even though I think the 49ers, I still think they kind of blew it a little bit there at the end.
Evan, did the 49ers lose it, or did the Chiefs win it?
No, the Chiefs won it. I mean, the 49ers, they started throwing the ball. I don't know why they didn't run the ball more in the fourth quarter. I mean, you could make the argument that their play calling and the way they executed gave it to Kansas City, but the Chiefs still had to go down the field and make plays, and they did it. I will say I would be remiss if I came on this podcast and did not have a hot take.
That's true.
You are in the hot seat.
I am in the hot seat. I thought that was an incredibly boring Super Bowl. One of the least enjoyable Super Bowls I can remember. It was a little bit better than the Patriots-Rams from the year before, but I didn't even feel like the Chiefs. I guess they had 3 consecutive scoring drives in the fourth quarter, but Mahomes was underthrowing balls. He looked nervous to me throughout that whole game. I think part of it is you got to credit San Francisco's defense, right? Unbelievable defense, probably the best Chiefs seen all year. But there wasn't any real big play besides the Tyreek Hill play. It was just a boring game to me. Honestly, I was at a friend's house watching it, and if I wasn't there, I probably would have turned on Madden and thrown it on my computer. I just was not into the game. The commercials weren't as good as I thought they were going to be. Halftime show was pretty good. I'll give Shakira and J-Lo that, but I don't know, BP. I feel like the last 2 years Super Bowl has been pretty boring.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think, because keep in mind, Jimmy G had the Niners at the 50-yard line with a minute and a half left, and they were trailing by 4, and all of a sudden you're like, well, if he can score a touchdown, geez, so I thought that had the makings of sort of an exciting game. And
sure.
Keep in mind, too, if the Niners had stopped the Chiefs instead of Damian Williams scoring that touchdown, they could have had a shot, and it would have been a one-possession game. Maybe they could have gotten a Hail Mary into the end zone. For me, I think it was shades of last year's game where you had the veteran coach, Bill Belichick, facing a young phenom in Sean McVay, an offensive genius. And this year, the same thing happened. Andy Reid, a veteran coach, against Kyle Shanahan. I just think Kyle Shanahan, I don't know what happened. I think the play calling just kind of went away from him, stopped running the ball, and all of a sudden he's been outscored. I think it's 52-0 in the last 2 second halves he's participated in the Super Bowl, because if you remember, he was the offensive coordinator for the Falcons in the Super Bowl. Kyle, remember that one very much. Cory's brother, when they choked to the Patriots 28-3. But I think it kind of just shows you the greatness of Patrick Mahomes. He was having an off game, not really throwing the ball well. And all of a sudden on 3rd and 15 has that big play to Tyreek Hill. Yeah. And then he's able to connect with Damian Williams on a couple of consecutive scoring drives. And give the Chiefs defense credit for Frank Clark, Terrell Suggs, who won his 2nd Super Bowl. Those guys really were able to come through defensively for the Chiefs late. And for me, the Chiefs run kind of reminds me of the Nationals run because the Nats were trailing in all 5 of their elimination games, came back and won. The Chiefs were trailing in all 3 of their quote-unquote elimination games because it's one and done in the NFL playoffs, and they end up coming back. And one last shout-out to D. Ford, who was the most unlucky man on the planet because he was the reason the Chiefs didn't make the Super Bowl last year because he was called for that offsides. And then this year he's on the Niners and they lose. So Sorry, D Ford, but my question for you guys is, who has the biggest sort of gain from the Super Bowl? I mean, I think especially look at the Chiefs, look at a guy like Mahomes, look at a guy like Andy Reid, who had the Hall of Fame resume, just never got the ring. A guy like Eric Bieniemy, who now can say he's an offensive coordinator, Super Bowl champion. Especially, I would be shocked if he's not a head coach after next season. But who sort of had the most to gain from the Super Bowl?
I personally think it was Mahomes when you look at him. And, the big debate that we always get into with quarterbacks is how many Super Bowls have you won? And, I mean, you see guys, even, some of the best in the game. Drew Brees has only won one Super Bowl. Phillip Rivers now has never won a Super Bowl. Ben Roethlisberger won 2, Eli won 2, so they're kind of elevated a little more. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl. So even, you have these great quarterbacks all these years, and they're kind of getting now towards the end of their careers. And you kind of look back and think, man, I would have expected them to win more Super Bowls. So now the fact that Mahomes is 24, already has one on his resume, I think that kind of becomes sort of the mark going forward now is to see. I think we even talked about, like, what would you put the over and under at for Mahomes' career Super Bowls? I think we said 2.5. Do you think he gets 3 or more, or something like that? And I mean, I personally think he has all the pieces in place to get 3 Super Bowls, but we've also gone down that road with other teams. We've gone down that road with the Seahawks and said they have all the pieces in place after Russell Wilson won that first Super Bowl to win 2 or 3 more, and they haven't won another one. So I think the NFL is always changing. Who knows, this it sounds crazy to say, but this could have been, Mahomes' only chance of winning a Super Bowl. And you don't know how things change out 3-4 years from now. So I think him getting that one to start off with at only 24 years old now is big, and we'll be looking for more, looking forward to see how many more he can get in his career.
Let me ask you guys a question. We'll get into it. If Eli Manning did not win any rings, how would we view him as a quarterback?
A very mediocre quarterback.
Well, he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer anyway, but
if he didn't win any, if he won no Super Bowls, how would you say he's a Hall of Famer?
No way.
Okay, so I think the person who had the most to gain from this game was Jimmy Garoppolo. And here's why, okay? You turn on sports talk radio, television the last month or so. Some people won't give Jimmy Garoppolo any credit for this 49ers season. It's Shanahan, it's running the ball, it's Kittle, it's the defense, it's Sherman, okay? Jimmy Garoppolo has 8 pass attempts in the NFC Championship game. If he won that Super Bowl, no disputing, he's a Super Bowl champion, and he is for sure the person who probably deserves that contract that he got.
Well, he is technically a Super Bowl champion. I mean, he
was
a backup.
Correct. You're 100% right. Okay, I'm sorry. He establishes himself as a starter. Let me ask you this. Are you guys totally sold on Jimmy Garoppolo for the next 10 years as the 49ers quarterback?
I mean, I'd say yes. I mean, just from a simple standpoint of you look at that division, I think at least going into next year, I think it's going to be interesting. Rams, I think, will bounce back. But and you got the Seahawks with Russell Wilson, and you've got the Kyler Murray.
So I would actually argue I wouldn't feel good about Garoppolo coming back next year. I mean, look at the Rams, right? They went from great to mediocre this year. That's one of the toughest divisions in football. Mm-hmm. I think Kyler Murray's going to have a breakout year next year. I think Goff will bounce back in some way in the Rams. And Russell Wilson, I think, was the second best player in the National Football League this year behind Lamar Jackson. So all I'm saying is, if Garoppolo wins that Super Bowl, he's got instant credibility, like Eli Manning. But if Eli Manning didn't win those 2 Super Bowls, are you telling me, I don't think the Giants keep him until 2015-16 as their starting quarterback. So that's why I think Garoppolo had the most to gain with that win and the most to lose. See, here's the thing. If Mahomes lost that game, I feel like we would have this conversation. Mahomes is immensely talented. It was his second year as a starter. He's got plenty of time to win a Super Bowl. Even though it's not guaranteed, he's got the talent. He's got Andy Reid. Garoppolo, there's no telling. What if you don't get the Niners back to the Super Bowl for the next 3 or 4 years? But he's got that Super Bowl, and once a quarterback at a young age wins a Super Bowl for the team, they're clinging to him, and Eli Manning is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, I agree with you with Jimmy G. It's hard to beat that point. I'm just gonna say from just like a pure happiness perspective, I'm just happy that Andy Reid won the Super Bowl because he was, in my opinion, I think I've said this before, Corey, the best coach in all of sports, not just the NFL, that did not have a championship to his name. And you look at his coaching tree, like we can discuss whether or not he's better than Bill Belichick. Obviously, Belichick has the Super Bowl rings. But if you look at Andy Reid's coaching tree compared to Belichick's, it's not even a competition. I mean, Andy Reid has John Harbaugh, Super Bowl champion, Doug Peterson, Super Bowl champion. Ron Rivera took a team to a 15-1 record in a Super Bowl appearance. So, you
Matt
got
Nagy, another young guy up and coming.
Matt Nagy, I think he won Coach of the Year last year, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right.
You look at his coaching tree; it's just been so much more accomplished. And here's a guy who, I mean, has a great offense and all that good stuff. But the narrative was he could never win the big game. His play calling was questionable, and it looked like we'd kind of see that again. The Chiefs were down 20-10, but Andy Reid is able to sort of engineer a great game plan in the fourth quarter and really take this team over the top. I agree with you. I think the 49ers are going to be interesting next year, but I just think from a legacy standpoint and a resume standpoint, Andy Reid, for him to get the Super Bowl, now it's not even, like, people can't even say anymore, he chokes in the playoffs. Like, he's got the Super Bowl, and I'm happy for him. Here's the question I want to ask you guys, because I know that, Evan, you kind of touched on it, but if you had to look at next year, I know it's a way too early prediction, as they say, but who do you think is more likely to make it back to the Super Bowl? Would you say the Chiefs, or would you say the Niners?
I mean, I would say the Chiefs. I think it goes back to quarterback play. That's what the NFL is driven by, is do you have the quarterback that can get you far in this league? And Patrick Mahomes, I think he's a consensus top 3 quarterback in the NFL. There's a little argument. Some may say 1, some may say anywhere in there, but I think it's a consensus top 3 quarterback, and he's the kind of guy that, anytime he steps on the field, defenses have to game plan around him. I don't know when Jimmy G steps on the field, defenses don't have to game plan around him. They game plan around the other players that are kind of surrounding him. So I would say the Chiefs are more expected to reach the Super Bowl again next year as opposed to the 49ers.
I mean, think about the upsets in the NFC this year. I'm still stunned that the last 2 years, the New Orleans Saints never made the Super Bowl. I mean, I think the Saints, this year, I predicted them to win the Super Bowl this year before the playoffs started. I mean...
So did Billy.
I don't think that the Vikings upset the Saints next year in the playoffs per se, right? And I think the path was a little bit easier for the Niners. I think the Packers overachieved as a team this year. And there's no guarantee, I might mess up his name, Raheem Mostert, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no guarantee that guy's going to go off like he did in the NFC Championship game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Niners go 7-9 and 8-8 next year. I mean, Richard Sherman gets a year older on the defensive side of the ball, right? I think that help me with the rookie receiver for San Francisco. His name. Deebo Samuel. Great talent, but there's no guarantee if he can do it for another year. Emmanuel Sanders is getting older. Kittle's a staple at the tight end spot. So it would not surprise me if the Niners don't make the playoffs next year for the sole reason that the NFC West is so good. I mean, I think the Cardinals can win 6, 7, 8 games next year. I really do with Kyler Murray. I think that the Rams are going to be hungry. I mean, they invested a lot in that Marcus Peters trade to bring in, Jalen Ramsey. I think it's going to be tough for the Niners to do it again next year.
And for all the points you guys made, I'm going to say the Chiefs. I'm going to add one more point. If you just look at their conferences, I mean, I think in the AFC, I've always believed, at least for the last couple of years, it's been a weaker conference. I mean, who's really going to challenge the Chiefs? You've got the Ravens, and I have serious questions as to whether Lamar Jackson can keep up his MVP season next season. And then, you've got, I think, wherever Tom Brady ends up playing, I think that you got to give them a legitimate chance wherever he ends up going. You've got the Texans, although you got Bill O'Brien, and, he's kind of like Andy Reid now. He's kind of like the guy who's like, all right, he's a good coach, maybe not Andy Reid's resume, but he's the guy that you're like, all right, he's got to sort of find a way to get it done. And so if you just look at pure conference, the Chiefs have it. Who's going to challenge them in the division. The Chargers not going to have Phillip Rivers. Raiders, they're inconsistent. They're moving to Vegas. They're going to have distractions. What me and Evan always talk about.
And the Broncos.
Even
though I think Drew Lock, low key, could be a good quarterback down the road for that. But right.
You just look at the Niners, like you mentioned, their division. I honestly think the Seahawks are the best team in that division. I mean, keep in mind, look at the 2 games they played. Seattle beat them in San Francisco and should have beat them if not for a lucky play in the end zone for the Niners. The Rams, I think, will be back. Like Evan mentioned, Kyler Murray's only going to get better. And then you just look at outside the division, the Saints, the Packers. They're going to be desperate to win with the guys that they have at quarterback. The NFC East, I think the Cowboys and the Eagles are going to fight it out. They've got the talent to go far. So I just think from a pure conference standpoint,
McCarthy's a proven winner.
Yeah, I mean, although it has been 9 years since he won a Super Bowl, but nonetheless, I mean, I think you got to take both of those teams legitimately. So I think I agree with you guys. The Chiefs are more likely to make the Super Bowl, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the NFL. Evan, I know you got to go, but thank you so much for joining us, and really appreciate you taking the time, gracing us, as we say. You're Mr. Virginia Tech SMA.
No, it's a team program here, BP, which you've had a big part in over the last couple of years. But appreciate you guys having me on, and go Jets. Let's hope we make the playoffs next year.
Go Jets.
Well, we know for a fact that the Jets are not going to make the playoffs, but nonetheless, that'll be the last word because Evan can't respond to that. But thank you again to Evan Hughes for joining us on this podcast. Cory, briefly before we sort of move on from the NFL, if you had to, like I said, it is as they you kind of look at sort of those rankings they post the day after championship games. There's always that way too early top 25 or way too early predictions. Who would you say is making the Super Bowl next year? If you have to pick today, nearly 360 days away from the next Super Bowl, who are you going to say makes the Super Bowl? Right now, if you had to pick the two teams right now.
Got to put our money where our mouth is, right?
That's right.
Well, you seem to be low on them, but I'm going to say the Ravens. I think they go through the AFC, and I think even another offseason of putting in new stuff that Lamar Jackson can do. I think he'll be at the same level that he was this year with more stuff even instituted for him to do in that offense. I like that team. I think it was a fluke game that they had in the playoffs. I think they'll learn from that, kind of, doing that balancing act of resting players at the end of the year with a bye week already. So I like the Ravens. And then I don't know if I should say it. Should I say it, Billy, for the NFC?
I mean, I don't think you should say it, but I know what you're going to say.
I'm going to go with the Dallas Cowboys. I tweeted it like I mentioned I would after the game in last week's podcast. But I really just think that they have all the pieces in place for a team that can make a deep run in the playoffs. It just comes down to putting it all together now, having the right coach in place. I mean, it could be a disaster again. We don't know what McCarthy's going to bring, but I like his track record in Green Bay, nine playoff runs in 13 seasons there. So I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, say the Cowboys. I like a Cowboys-Ravens Super Bowl.
And I know I did say I'm a little bit low on the Ravens. I would love to see the Ravens in the Super Bowl. I think that would be great for the NFL with Lamar Jackson's exciting play. I'm going to go with the Saints. Evan mentioned it. It's hard to imagine how they have not been in the Super Bowl either of the last 2 years. They've had a talented team. You really feel like Drew Brees' time is running out. And I guess technically speaking, he has not officially said he's coming back. So I'm saying that with the expectation he's coming back. I think Drew Brees not only comes back, but maybe with the last hurrah in him is able to lead this team to the Super Bowl. And I might shock you with this hot take because I know you mentioned the Cowboys. I'm not going to say the Redskins, of course, even though I did, like you tweeted out, I did tweet out they were going to win the Super Bowl 2021. But I'm going to say whatever team Tom Brady goes to,
I was thinking that too,
will make it to the Super Bowl. Because I just think, love him or hate him, to not see two 40-year-old quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, two Hall of Famers, two legends, two of the greatest of all time to face it off. We should have seen it 2 years ago if not for that bogus call on that pass interference against the Rams. I would love to see Drew Brees and Tom Brady in the Super Bowl against each other. Now, the question is, where does Tom Brady go? I still think if he stays with the Patriots, he has the best chance of winning. But there's been talks he might go to the Raiders. He might go to the Titans. I did mention the Titans before on the podcast. But what do you think of that? I think I'd love to see Drew Brees and Tom Brady, two 42-year-old quarterbacks facing off for the Lombardi Trophy.
No, you stole the words right from my mouth. I was going to say that as a dark horse pick after you finished giving your picks, that wherever Tom Brady ends up, I think you look at him, he probably has 1, maybe 2 more years left in the NFL. If he even decides to come back this year, which it looks like he did. That he kind of had that little spoiler ad with Hulu that kind of hinted at him coming back. So it looks like Tom Brady will be back next year, and I don't see how, you can say he's dropped off a little bit. The talent wasn't there of the Patriots receiving core this past season, but Tom Brady always possesses the threat to go to a Super Bowl. It's been proven over and over again that even if the Patriots don't look like they have the best team, he somehow finds a way. So I think if that's with the Patriots, if that's with Gruden and the Raiders, if that's with the Chargers, wherever that might be, I think you definitely have to look at Brady and then Brees, like you mentioned too. If he's coming back, I think he's kind of has one last hurrah and one last chance to win a Super Bowl type deal. And even you look at quarterbacks in the past, they kind of have that thing where they go off. Peyton Manning's a great example of it, a guy at the end of his career going off one last run in the Super Bowl. And, these could be two more guys that kind of we see going down that similar path.
Yeah, Ray Lewis, too, is like that with the Ravens. Yeah, I just think you can't underestimate Tom Brady's acumen. I mean, again, and for the record, I think he's playing better at his age than Peyton Manning was in his last season. And even at his age, he still led the Patriots, despite all their problems, to an AFC East division title. Probably should have beaten the Titans in that first game. I did notice that although me, you, and Evan, for the record, said the Chiefs had more of a chance to make the Super Bowl, neither of us picked the Chiefs to make it back. Any reasons as to why you didn't pick them?
I just think NFL is like the one sport where it's so hard to repeat. Maybe not the one sport, but it is a very hard sport to repeat in. I think I heard today that there's been no repeat champions in 15 years when the Patriots did it back then. And so, they very well, they have the pieces in place. They have Mahomes, they have Andy Reid, they have Eric Bieniemy coming back. So, everything is there for them to make a run. But just with how hard it is, say one of those 10-point deficits, they're not able to mount the comeback. They're done even this year in the first round, even down 24 to the Texans. So I think it's such a fine line in the NFL playoffs, especially. So I just don't. I'm just hesitant to put it out there that the Chiefs repeat and get back to the Super Bowl. I
agree with you, and not to hate a little bit, but if you look at their run, it's not like they played a really great quarterback either. I know Deshaun Watson's a good quarterback, but who did they play? They played Ryan Tannehill in the AFC Championship game, and then Jimmy G in the Super Bowl. Both those guys. Well, Ryan Tannehill, he did win Comeback Player of the Year. Kudos to him, but he's not really a guy you say, he can lead you down the field and win. And Jimmy G, as we saw in the Super Bowl, still has a lot to prove. So I just think, if Tom Brady goes somewhere next year, who's not to say Tom Brady, if they face each other, couldn't pull off a win in that game? Or maybe Deshaun Watson gets better after year. Lamar Jackson's going to get better after year. So I do think if the Chiefs were in the NFC where they might have had to play teams like the Saints with Drew Brees, the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, I think it could have been an interesting story. But like you said, it's just so hard in the NFL, especially when it's one and done. Because theoretically, you might have the better team on paper, but if you have the better team that day, you could potentially pull off an upset. So I'm saying the Chiefs will also not make the Super Bowl, but you never know. They have Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid.
And even when you think about it, too, just the luck that's involved. Even you look back at Fitzpatrick beating Week 17, beating the Patriots, so the Chiefs are able to get a bye. You say if the Chiefs don't get that bye and that home field advantage that ended up being throughout the playoffs, who knows if they would have gone on this run as well. So there is even a lot of luck involved, as there is with kind of any sport in the run that these teams go on.
Before we move away from the NFL, I wanted to just briefly go over the awards. MVP, Lamar Jackson of the Ravens. Coach of the Year, John Harbaugh of the Ravens. Offensive Player of the Year was Michael Thomas, wide receiver for the Saints. Defensive Player of the Year, Stephen Gilmore, cornerback for the Patriots. Nick Bosa, Defensive Rookie of the Year. Kyler Murray, Offensive Rookie of the Year. And Comeback Player of the Year was Ryan Tannehill. Those are the major awards, of course. Corey, looking at those awards, do you have any major beef with any of them, or you think for the most part pretty good NFL got it right?
I wouldn't say I have any major beef. I think the one that kind of stands out is Offensive Rookie of the Year. With Kyler Murray, I think he kind of got that award just because of quarterbacks put up more stats, but I think you look at a guy like Josh Jacobs with the Raiders and how much he meant to that team, and I think he was even the favorite to win that until he got hurt the last few weeks of the season. And even a guy like Miles Sanders, too, with the Eagles and all those weapons that went down for them, and he was kind of a key cog in their team going forward. So, I think Kyler Murray obviously has the stats because of what it entails being a quarterback in the NFL, but I think some other guys were maybe more valuable to their team.
Yeah, same with you. Really no major issues. I will say I think there were a number of guys you could have considered for Coach of the Year. John Harbaugh, I think, deservedly won it because, 14-2, and you just look at his resume, Super Bowl champion, he had never won Coach of the Year before, but I think, Kyle Shanahan, definitely you had a case for him. Mike Tomlin, the job he did in Pittsburgh, having them in a position to even be in the playoff hunt, I think was remarkable after Big Ben went down. Sean McDermott with the Bills, Bill O'Brien with the Texans. LaFleur, yeah, with the Packers. So I just think the number of coaches you could have said that could have won that award, but I just think, like you've talked about and we've talked about on this podcast, the excitement of Lamar Jackson, they were the best team in the NFL. I think John Harbaugh was deserving of that award. But that just about puts a wrap on the NFL season. I still think there's a lot to be looking forward to in the offseason, whether or not Tom Brady signs with another team, or maybe if there's a big trade or a big signing. It's kind of hard in the NFL, unlike other sports, because there's more of a tighter salary cap, but you never know. We'll see what happens. Phillip Rivers, too, is out there on the free agent market, so we will see what happens with the state of the NFL and what happens this offseason. But as we transition to our next topic on the podcast, I want to talk about what's been happening with the MLB offseason. A lot of stuff has happened, Corey. Dusty Baker was officially hired by the Astros a couple days ago. I know both you and I talked about him being a potential candidate for Houston. And then, of course, a big trade last night that happened. Basically, Red Sox are trading away Mookie Betts and David Price to the Dodgers for prospects. And in that trade, too, Jock Peterson goes to the Angels. So what's kind of your take on sort of the current state of the MLB offseason? Let's first start with Dusty Baker on the Astros.
Yeah, I think Dusty Baker, that's the exact kind of move that the Astros needed to make. And even had the honor this past Saturday to listen to Ken Rosenthal. He was here in Blacksburg speaking to the baseball team, and I was able to cover that event as meet in their baseball night in Blacksburg. And, you know, he had a Q&A session at the end of his little talk to the team. And someone asked him, who is your way too early World Series pick? And he didn't really necessarily give a pick, but he said one thing to keep an eye on is the Astros and their kind of run of, you know, it's an odd situation that they're in because there's never really been a team like this that comes back with so much to prove from, you know, things that were kind of created from themselves and not outside things that were created per se. So I think if Ken Rosenthal is thinking that he's the top baseball insider, I think we all have to be thinking that with Dusty Baker. He's been a winner wherever he's gone. I know you liked him with the Nationals. I liked him with the Giants. He's been a few stops in between there too with the Cubs and the Reds, and always been a winner wherever he's gone. So the Astros are going to be contenders coming back, and really, like we said, that was kind of the type of hire that they needed to kind of restore order there in that organization.
Yeah, you can argue he's kind of like Andy Reid now. He's a guy who's very accomplished, just hasn't gotten that elusive championship. I will say his deal was very interesting because it's a one-year team option for the second year. And we talked about it before, but Joe Espada, who's being retained as the bench coach, was interviewed for other positions. You never know if this might be a situation where Dusty comes in for a year, and especially if they don't end up winning the World Series, they could say, let's transition to Joe Espada, who's more familiar with the clubhouse. That's what I think is going to be interesting with this dynamic. I don't think there's a question that Dusty is qualified for this job, that he can handle the clubhouse, handle all the scrutiny that's going to come with the Astros this season. But how does he mesh with the staff? Because he even said that he was not making any changes to the staff because of how late it is in the game. Spring training is only in a few weeks of this month. I do think I heard that he's going to be able to bring in one coach, and that's likely going to be Chris Spire, who was the Nats bench coach, and he's been with his bench coach in Cincinnati and I believe Chicago as well. So I think just being able to mesh with that staff is going to be interesting. But yeah, I agree with you. There's no reason that the Astros shouldn't be among the World Series favorites with the talent that they have. And now you add in a veteran manager like Dusty Baker who knows how to get the job done. And I will say, if no one thought about this, it's going to be awkward. The MLB All-Star Game, which is going to be in L.A. this summer, Dusty Baker is going to be managing against the guy that replaced him, Davey Martinez, because the World Series managers, in case you forgot, get to manage the All-Star Game the following season, and the MLB did announce that Dusty would be allowed to manage the game. So, Corey, that's going to be pretty awkward. Davey Martinez managing against the guy he replaced. And also, if I'm not mistaken, I think in his press conference, Dusty took a few shots at the Nats, saying that he was rooting for the Astros against the Nats in the World Series. So I think that's going to set up for an interesting dynamic. Also, the fact that the Astros are coming to D.C. July 4th weekend, so Dusty will have a chance to face the Nats in the regular season when the games do matter, at least before the postseason.
Yeah, a lot of fireworks there, both literally and figuratively. And like you mentioned, there is going to be that awkward tension with, the guy that replaced you type deal, and kind of wanting to get the best of him and prove that, why was I outed? But, Davey Martinez does have the World Series ring to his name, and that's really what can be proven as the flex, the boast of among anyone else right now. So until Dusty gets that, I think Dave Martinez has the upper ground on him.
So definitely will be very interesting to see what happens with the Astros. let's talk about the Red Sox. This trade for Mookie Betts was sort of in the works for a couple days. I know that they had been talking to the Dodgers. Betts and Price were a big part of that Red Sox World Championship run in 2018. I think part of this might have to do with the fact that not only do they want to sort of rebuild, but start over, but also maybe kind of clear the team of guys who were attached to that tainted World Series run. It seems like Alex Cora got fired, and by the way, the Red Sox have still not hired a manager either. Yeah. So, Corey, what are your thoughts on the trade to the Dodgers? Of course, it seems like on paper the Dodgers got stronger, but what are your thoughts on that? And of course, in that trade too, like I mentioned, Jock Peterson goes to the Angels.
Yeah, I think you look at it, it might be considered a heist by the Dodgers, and the Red Sox were in a tough position because their payroll is way over right now, and the luxury tax and how that all works. And I'm not an expert on that, but basically they needed to cut down on some contracts, and Mookie Betts was he has 1 year left and really didn't know what they were going to be able to get out of him this year, so just wanted to cut their losses right now and see what pieces they could get. And really, when you look at the Dodgers, all they gave up was Jock Peterson, which I don't even know if that was involved in this deal. I think it was a completely separate thing because it was the Twins that were involved in this deal as the third team. But they got rid of him. They get rid of Alex Verdugo. He's kind of the main piece going to the Red Sox. You look at both of those guys, they're both quality players, but you get a guy in here like Mookie Betts, I think, who we can say is a consensus top 5 player in the MLB, a superstar who's still young and still going to continue to get better and better. I think, you give away 2 above-average outfielders to get a superstar. I'm perfectly fine with that move, and I think that's the right move to make if you are the Dodgers. And they didn't have to give up any of their top prospects. I know the Dodgers have one of the top farm systems as well. Guys like Gavin Lux, Dustin Mays, who's supposed to be a premier starter one day, and didn't have to give up any of those guys, and they still get Mookie Betts. So I think you look at it, and it might be considered a heist by the Dodgers.
I agree with you. I think the Dodgers on paper should be one of the favorites in the MLB. I still think I'm a little biased, but the Nats have a better pitching rotation. I'm not even sure, honestly, if you look at the stats, that's much of a hot take. But nonetheless, you got to give credit to the Dodgers. I think they're setting themselves up well, trying to retool for another championship run potentially this season. And how about the Angels getting Jock Peterson? Here's a guy who I will say I'm a little bit biased for because, full disclosure, I did work with his dad, Stu Peterson, one summer in lacrosse. But here's a guy, you look at how he performed in that World Series against the Astros. If the Dodgers had won that World Series, I think it's a very safe bet to say he would have been the MVP of that series. So now he goes to an Angels team with Anthony Rendon, of course, the best player in baseball, Mike Trout. You got Joe Madden there now. I think all of a sudden, Corey, who knows, maybe we could see a freeway World Series next year with the Dodgers and the Angels if things kind of fall the way that it should.
Yeah, shout out to Greg's team. I texted him last night even when that happened, and I was we were both like, is Jock Peterson good? And looked up his stats, and he had 36 home runs last year. I was kind of blown away when I saw that. I was like, wow, he really is, a player that performed last year. Because I think even you looked at it there, he had that one breakout year where he was in the home run derby too, and then kind of faltered after that stretch. And he kind of, he was going to be the next up-and-coming guy, and then kind of faltered off a little bit, went a little under the radar. But, you look at him, 36 home runs last year, batted .250. He's a guy that's, you can place him, fifth in that lineup, and he's a guy that'll, strike fear to go deep anytime he steps into the box. So you put him, like you mentioned, with Trout, with Rendon there. You get Joe Madden, of course, operating that team. Now they become a contender, I think. The Yankees are obviously, I think, you can look at them and the team that they had last year, over 100 wins, and you add Garrett Cole, they're going to be a top contender. And then, like you said, with the Astros and what all they've done to kind of, getting Dusty Baker, and they have most of the pieces in place minus Garrett Cole, they're going to be contenders as well. So I think you have 3 teams right now that are kind of sticking out above the pack. Of course, the Angels are the one team that hasn't done it in the past couple of years, so they're kind of the newcomer on the block, I guess you could say. But I think it'll make a very competitive American League. And then the Twins, too. They're a team that, added Josh Donaldson, added Kenta Maeda along in this deal. So I think you look at the Twins and what they've done in the AL Central, they're a team that will contend as well.
And not that the Red Sox were going to offer any competition anyway, but now with this trade, really a cakewalk for the Yankees to win the AL East. I mean, absolutely no excuse at all. And to be honest, they probably, you look at their payroll and their talent, should be favored to make the World Series next year. So we'll see what happens with Major League Baseball. Really quickly, Red Sox still have not hired a manager. I said the two names, Buck Showalter, he's got the experience, or you go the Jason Varitek route, a guy who doesn't have the experience, but he's got the credibility, having been a fan favorite, the captain, as they say, in Boston for a long time. What do you think about those names? Has your position really changed at all on who the Red Sox should go after?
No, I don't. I think out of all the names that have been thrown out there, I do like your recommendation of Varitek the most. Just like you said, the captain, Boston fans will love him, and they really need some kind of revitalization in that organization right now. I think Varitek could do that.
So be interesting to see what happens with the MLB offseason. Of course, we've got both the MLB and NFL in their respective off seasons, and we'll see what happens going forward. Really quickly, as we kind of close our podcast, we haven't talked about them as much because of all the different things going on in sports, whether it was college football, NFL, MLB, even in the NBA with the unfortunate passing of Kobe Bryant. That was sort of at the forefront for a while. But let's quickly talk about Virginia Tech's men's basketball team, Corey. I mean, this is a team that has 5 ACC wins and a couple of high-profile wins against Michigan State and UNC at home, although I know that if you look at the record, UNC, we should have beaten that team. But look at the program. Roy Williams is there. I mean, that's, I think, a big win, especially because now you look at sort of how things have played out. But they've struggled a little bit this year, and the ACC as a whole has kind of had a down year as a conference. So, Corey, what are your kind of thoughts on the team overall, and do you think they have a shot at the NCAA tournament?
I think their shot at the NCAA tournament is kind of shot now. They were certainly in position after that UNC double overtime win, but then have now rattled off 4 straight losses. And I really think you're starting to see the youth catch up with this team. I mean, it's a team that, you look at the guys that they're starting Landers Nolley, redshirt freshman, Tyrese Radford, redshirt freshman. Wabisa Bede, he's the only kind of experienced guy starting. He's a redshirt, or I don't know if he's a redshirt. I think he's just straight up junior. PJ Horn's a junior as well. But then other guys coming, Jalen Cone, he's a true freshman. Hunter Couture, true freshman. Naheem Aline, true freshman. So when, the top 8 guys in your rotation, when 5 of them are freshmen or redshirt freshmen, this is kind of what you expect for a team to hit the wall. They certainly overperformed, I think, at times this season, already having 5 ACC wins before the last 4 losses, putting them at 5-7 in the ACC now. I think, the foundation is certainly set, though, with Mike Young. I think we've seen his coaching acumen and just the way that, with a limited roster that he does have, he's still able to get the most out of them. I think it's going to be a fun team to watch going forward when they gain more experience. Having, a couple more high-rated freshmen coming in next year will be exciting for the program as well. But I think right now is kind of right where you would expect them to be. I think they certainly still have a good chance to make the NIT, but I think their NCAA tournament chances are kind of shot right now.
I agree with you. It's pretty slim if you're looking at Virginia Tech in terms of making the big dance. But I will say this. Looking at their schedule, you look at who's coming up. You've got Boston College at home, Pitt at home, Miami at home. Then you travel to Duke. That's going to be a tough game. You play UVA at home. That's going to be a tough game, rival game, of course. You go to Louisville, who's ranked number 5 in the country, Clemson in Blacksburg, and then Notre Dame at Notre Dame to close out the regular season. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but assuming that the automatic losses are Duke and Louisville, if they're able to win those other games, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying all of a sudden you got 11 wins in the ACC, maybe 12 wins. I might have done my math wrong on that. I'm just saying, maybe you could be a sneaky team. You could sneak in, especially if you are able to get a win or 2 in the ACC tournament. So crazier things have happened, but I don't know what your thoughts on that. It's a little bit of a hot take. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you never know.
Yeah, so that would put them at 11-9 in the ACC, and even that might not be enough to get them in this year. The way how down the ACC has been, there's really only those 3 premier teams up top: Louisville, Duke, and Florida State have been kind of the class of the ACC, and really everyone else is trying to establish themselves kind of in that second tier. So, right now there's only 3 guarantees, even I'd say, to make the NCAA tournament out of the ACC. So, you look at those wins; they're not going to count as these big resume boosters that Tech would have to get them into the NCAA tournament. So, I mean, it'll be tough. If they were to end up doing that, I think it's highly unlikely. I put it at like 1 or 2%, honestly. But I think, like you mentioned too, they would also have to win a couple games in the ACC tournament itself to get in. So, but like I said, just enjoy this team for what it is. It's such a young team, but they play an exciting brand of basketball, even if it can be frustrating at times to watch them and just watch the youth that they do have. But support what Mike Young is starting to build. He has that kind of philosophy stone by stone. And I think, looking at this kind of even following along the lines of what Buzz Williams did 3 or 4 years from now, I think he could have really something special brewing here in Blacksburg.
And I will say, that theory that I had, they probably would have to either win at Duke or Louisville to really sort of spice up that run they've had. So, probably slim to none. But I will say this, I know we've talked about it before, but man, Mike Young, I think just probably one of the genuinely nicest guys. Yeah. I think it's good to see him and Kenny Brooks on the women's side really do what they do. Corey, I know we've talked about it. Mike Young certainly a lot more friendly with the press than Buzz Williams. Not taking a shot at Buzz, I think he's a very good basketball coach, but certainly I think he frustrated people at times. And I'm sure you saw the video, but one thing that I really enjoyed was I think it was after the UNC game. You could tell Mike Young really had a relationship with the guys in the press. He knew everybody's name. I was actually at a TTL show that I help out with from time to time. That the weekly radio show that Mike Young does with Laser and Burnup Fuente comes on in the football season too. But Burnup asked him a question and then Mike Young interrupted and then he immediately said, "I'm sorry, Mike, I interrupted you. What was your question?" Buzz Williams would have never done that. That's not a shot. That's just a fact. So, Corey, I think, and I know you've met him a few times here and there. Just a really good guy to be leading this program. Not just a good coach, but a really good guy who's from the area too. So I think Virginia Tech is definitely in the right place going forward.
Yeah, and I actually haven't met him in a professional setting. I only met Coach Young once walking through Turner Dining Hall and shook his hand when he first arrived here on campus. And he said, "Oh, how you doing? Thanks for the support." Even just in a little 15-second conversation like that. And I actually am covering the game this Saturday against Boston College, where Chris Coleman, the guy who normally covers the basketball for Texas Island, has some friends come into town and wanted to hang out with them. So I'll be covering the game on Saturday and looking forward to that of the post-game press conference and being there in the room with Coach Young and just the different dynamic that will be.
For sure, so that you'll be making your debut, I guess.
My debut covering Virginia Tech basketball, so looking forward to that for sure. And hopefully they can get off this little losing streak from me and, I can make it a good article out of it.
I will say, and not to remind you, I mean, your football career, although it wasn't your fault, ended a little unceremoniously.
Exactly.
With the loss to,
so we got to have something good to cap it off of basketball, and then hopefully the baseball team, I'll be covering that in the spring. Hopefully they look a little better this year than they have in years past.
For sure. But, we love what Mike Young is doing in Blacksburg. And, folks, even I know we've been spoiled a little bit recently because for a long time Hokies were not NCAA viable. I mean, people forget about that because of our recent success. But, even if they don't make the tournament this year, enjoy it for what it is. And I think it's going to be we're going to field a very exciting team pretty soon in the future. But, Corey, that's just about does it for episode 3. We got a lot of stuff we got through with the NFL recapping the Super Bowl. Evan Hughes was a guest on our show. We even talked about broadcast team, something that we don't really talk about as much on the podcast outside of the pure sports. But definitely a good one. And, of course, Evan was nice enough to join us.
Yeah, and like we said, Evan was our two-time guest, recurring guest. So loved having him on. And like you said, the Super Bowl is obviously, we could argue, the biggest sporting event, so good to break that down. And finally get the kind of a look at Coach Young and seeing what he's doing here in Blacksburg. Like that discussion as well.
Well, once again, thank you so much to our special guest, Evan Hughes, for joining us for the second time on the Real Talk podcast and on the hot seat. For my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael, Corey Van Dyke, I am Hot Take Billy Parvatam on in. We say so long to you for just a while. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next time. Love you 3000. 1000. 1000. 1000. 1000. 1000. 1000.